Hey, are you tired of the left and right politics? I hope you'll subscribe to my YouTube channel. Just click that subscribe button, ring the little bell, and prepare to free your mind from the traditional red versus blue. I once heard a talk show host say that Donald Trump will be the nominee of the Republican Party in 2024 unless one of three things happens: his finances, his health, or his indictment get in the way. Finances, health, indictment. The third of those potential impediments looms larger today than it did yesterday. And so too, that his behavior the afternoon of January 6th is going to be examined in a way that it wasn't during the impeachment trial, during the second Trump impeachment trial. And both of these factors are leading me to ask what I think is a pretty provocative question today at Smerconish.com, the daily survey question. Is the primary purpose of each of these developments to preclude him from running in 2024? Let me explain. CNN had the coverage first regarding the New York Attorney General. Letitia James, the New York AG, is now joining the Manhattan District Attorney's Office in a criminal investigation of the Trump Organization. The Attorney General's Office investigation into the Trump Organization has been underway since 2019. It has been a civil probe up until now, not a criminal probe, but the office has recently informed the Trump Organization that now there's a criminal component to it. It's a serious sign for the former president. The Attorney General's office is now working with Cy Vance's office. He's the outgoing Manhattan DA who's been at the forefront of this criminal probe of Donald Trump. You'll remember that it's Cy Vance's office that went all the way to the Supreme Court of the United States and was successful in getting Donald Trump's tax returns. The investigation looking into whether the company misled lenders and insurance companies about the value of properties and whether it paid the appropriate taxes. That's what CNN is reporting the probe is about. Additional details from the New York Times coverage today, a three-person byline, which says this: for months, the district attorney's office has focused on Mr. Trump's long-serving chief financial officer, Allen Weisselberg, mounting an aggressive effort to gain his cooperation against Mr. Trump and the Trump Organization, according to people with knowledge of the matter. As part of the effort, the district attorney has subpoenaed records from Mr. Weisselberg's bank and the private school in Manhattan that his grandchildren have attended. So there's that. There's the fact that the New York Attorney General, Letitia James, is now saying and has notified the Trump Organization that her inquiry is not civil only, that there's a criminal component as well. Here's another potential blow to the former president. The House is voting today on whether to impanel a commission, a 9/11 style commission, to investigate the events of January 6th. President Trump is opposed to this. Kevin McCarthy, the Republican leader in the House, who views himself as a future Speaker of the House, both opposed to this. McCarthy announced his opposition yesterday. He says that it puts too much focus on the events of January 6th, and that if there is to be such an investigation, then other things should be examined as well. He says the violence in Portland, Oregon, the 2017 attack by a gunman on a GOP lawmaker baseball game, that too ought to be investigated. The more recent incident where a Capitol Hill police officer, not on January 6th, but subsequent to the 6th, should also be examined. It's going to pass the House. What happens in the Senate, I don't know. Mitch McConnell said yesterday that he's undecided as to whether to back this legislation that is set for House passage. Interesting to see the divide on editorial pages about the House now deciding they want a formal investigation into the events of January 6th. The Washington Post today regarded Kevin McCarthy's opposition as cowardice and distilled. They noted that an honest proceeding would require Mr. McCarthy to testify under oath about his eyewitness experience of the violence and to President Trump's apparent indifference to the violence. At the other end of the political spectrum, you've got the Wall Street Journal. The Wall Street Journal says, an independent commission could be useful, but, and I'm paraphrasing, in this case, it's going to be biased. Quote, the prospects for that, meaning a fair investigation, are none and slimmer. Speaker Nancy Pelosi has been driving this idea. She's got a record of using these commissions for partisan ends. Her goal here is to drive her narrative that the riot was a planned attempted coup, and to run on that theme to keep the House in 2022. She tipped her ambitions when she first proposed a commission with 7 members appointed by Democrats and 4 members appointed by Republicans. Says the Wall Street Journal, it's a shame to say it, but there isn't enough shared trust in Washington these days to pull off a bipartisan inquiry on such a polarized subject. Okay, so here's my question. Here's my survey question today at smirconish.com. The way that I've worded it is as follows. If there was no prospect of Donald Trump running in 2024, would the New York Attorney General and Congress be investigating Trump Inc. and the events of January 6th? That's the survey question. I should point out that TC cautioned me when I drafted that survey question and said, you're editorializing in your own question, implying that there would be no question but for me thinking there's a question, if you can follow all that logic or illogic as the case may be. I think it's a legitimate question. Would these respective investigations be taking place if Donald Trump were still not, as of mid-May of 2021, perceived as the Republican frontrunner for 2024? But that doesn't mean, here comes the nuance, right? That doesn't mean that I think the inquiries are without merit. I'm arguing that there are many meritorious investigations that resources do not allow to be conducted. If the impeachment process, if the, you get confused, I get confused in remembering the Trump years because it was like a fire hose of news every day. There were 2 Trump impeachment trials. The first had to do with the phone call to the Ukraine president asking him to investigate the Bidens in return for getting a White House meeting and the military assistance that he was looking for. But in the second of those trials, unlike the first, there was no fact-finding. If the second impeachment trial, which pertained to the attempt at insurrection on January 6th, and that is what I think that it was, if there had been fact-finding during that second impeachment trial, then today there'd be no need for a January 6th 9/11 style commission. In fact, do you remember the closest that the impeachment process, impeachment 2, came to any fact-finding? It actually involved Kevin McCarthy. But it showed what a sham of a quote-unquote trial it really was, because it was not a search for truth. What I'm referring to is there's a congresswoman from Washington State, Jamie Herrera. I think it's pronounced Butler, might be Butler, but she wanted to testify. She went public with the news that Kevin McCarthy had shared with her and other members of Congress, that there'd been that telephone call between Trump and McCarthy the afternoon of January 6th while the insurrection is taking place. Let me just slow down and remind everybody. Trump had given the speech at noonish, spoke for an hour. 1 o'clock, the Congress now convenes. The purpose is to ratify the Electoral College vote. But now comes the march toward the Capitol, the breaking in of the Capitol and so forth. And Trump, presumably just sitting at the White House and watching on flat screen televisions what was transpiring, is just letting the fire burn, prompting Kevin McCarthy to have a heated telephone conversation with the president, where the president says, Kevin, these people apparently are more concerned about the legitimacy of the vote than you were. Something like that. Here's my point. My point is that we weren't even contemplating Kevin McCarthy testifying. at the impeachment process. We were instead contemplating whether this one removed member of Congress could come in and could testify as to what Kevin McCarthy said the president had told him. Kind of ridiculous. It should have been McCarthy who testified, is my point. And no doubt, the prospect of Kevin McCarthy being called to testify in front of a 9/11 style commission looking at the events of January 6th is what's causing him to say, I don't think there ought to be a commission like there was for September 11. If there had been an investigation already commissioned and completed as part of the impeachment process, we wouldn't be having this conversation. But think about it this way. If, God forbid, hypothetically, I don't wish anybody ill, including the former president of the United States, if he had passed since January 6th, would we today be talking about a September 11 style commission looking at those events? I don't think so. And as for the New York Attorney General, we really don't know what's being investigated. Some of the reporting, as I shared from CNN, suggests that it pertains to the inflation of real estate values, which potentially could be bank fraud, which potentially could lead to some form of tax fraud. I'm not minimizing it, but I am saying if that's the sole focus, I would suggest there are countless developers out there who could face the same exposure, but resources don't allow it. So what are you saying, Michael? Are you saying this is all a witch hunt? Are you saying it's a witch hunt to investigate the events of January 6th? Hey, I've always been for a proper investigation of the events of January 6th. I, for one, want to know exactly what President Trump was doing behind closed doors at the White House that day while there was an attempted insurrection at the Capitol. Am I saying it's a witch hunt? I'm not. I'm simply questioning whether scarce resources of both prosecutors and Congress would be applied to these two situations if there were no prospect of Donald Trump running again. But he has exhibited through polling data and through people who have essentially declared their fealty to Trump ever since he left the White House, he has continued to evidence his grip on the Republican Party. And I believe that's a factor in all of this. It doesn't mean, let me say this twice, it doesn't mean that Donald Trump's behavior isn't worthy of analysis and investigation. It doesn't mean that at all. But just that his continued political viability, yeah, I think it's playing a role. If Donald Trump had gone quietly into that night and were not perceived to be in a position to lead the Republican Party, I question whether there would be an investigation of January 6th, and I question whether both the Attorney General of New York and the Manhattan DA would be guns blazing, still conducting investigations if it's just, quote unquote, just about inflation of real estate values pertaining to the Trump Organization. So now you know why I'm asking the survey question today, which is, if there was no prospect of Donald Trump running in 2024, would the New York Attorney General and the Congress be investigating Trump Inc. and the events of January 6th? Vote at Smerconish.com on today's survey question.